Forgiveness is quite a challenging topic. Again, it's one of those topics around which we have images or a concept or an idea. However, it very often doesn't work, even though that at the core of many spiritual teachings and of Christianity in particular in the Western world, there is this idea of forgiving one's enemies, forgiving those that have hurt us. However, the reason why it often doesn't work is that very often it is the good trying to forgive the bad. And so there's an inherent superiority there. And so forgiveness takes place when we meet what is, and when we meet the other individual as an equal. There already is an issue for many people. How do I meet the perpetrator as an equal? When we do our inner work, when we investigate our heart, when we have the courage to look at topics such as hatred, jealousy, bitterness, a sense of being hard done by, a sense of justice, wanting to punish, when we have the courage to even see that how our benevolent nature often is not benevolent. The good often triumph over the bad in a much more enthusiastic way. Today's freedom fighter becomes tomorrow's dictator. So when we're able to see how our goodness can be the devil himself dressed up as an angel of light, when we're able to face that, to face in here the inherent sense of superiority and look at our own shadow, then we're able to meet the perpetrator as an equal. When that is done, there is no need for forgiveness. It doesn't have to be attempted, it doesn't have to be tried. It simply happens. It happens in the truth that resides in the silence that is there when we meet the other person who's actually there. When you're able to look at a perpetrator and completely and totally feel and experience and know what it is that they have done to themselves. So when someone murders, rapes, harms another, what have they done to themselves? One of the problems we have with how the teachings of Christ have been distorted by many religions and many religious leaders is that we've become a very punitive culture, that the bad have to be punished. And so we have the bad that need to be punished, and yet this admonition, this teaching from Christ that says that we have to forgive, and we keep on trying to do that. The bad have to be punished, and we're supposed to forgive. There is a huge contradiction in that. And so one is very Old Testament in nature, and one is part of a distorted teaching. And so religion is almost always a distortion of the teachings of the Master, be that the Buddha, be that Krishna, be that Christ. It's always a distortion. And one of the greatest crimes committed by Christianity on Western culture is to tell everybody that they were born in sin. And so there is the birthplace of self-hatred. And so if that is the seed of our culture, self-hatred, if it's the seed of our culture, how then are we able to forgive the unforgivable? And that can really only be done once we experience the depths of our own heart. For the heart is very broad. It leads into this whole other universe that contains all of the higher and lower aspects of ourselves. And so within that world is also our shadow. And so we often feel justified in wanting to be punitive towards the perpetrator, even cruel. Even cruel. And we justify that by saying they're the bad one and we're the good one. I'm not suggesting that we do away with our legal system. Indeed, sometimes society does need to be protected from an individual who can be very sick. But what kind of society created that person? What kind of society creates despots? What kind of society creates rapists? What kind of society creates people who steal? And we live in a culture where some of the greatest thefts are sanctioned. Corruption in big business and government. And yet somebody from a disadvantaged background steals a transistor radio or a car, they might find themselves in prison. So we have a lot of inequality. We have lots of ideas about who's good and who's bad, and whose crimes are not as bad as other people's crimes. And so within the seed of Western culture, in fact all cultures on the planet, there is this notion that there are others who are badder than us, and there are others who are better than us. And so as we have the courage to meet what is in our own heart, some are afraid to love, really afraid to love. And why? Because perhaps they were raised in a family or a neighborhood or in a culture in which they experience a lot of hatred. Perhaps they were raised in Beirut or Belfast or on the West Bank or in another part of the world where there's so much hatred towards other groups. And in seeing that, they know that the core of hatred comes from a betrayed and wounded heart. Then they're too afraid to love. Because if I love, maybe that will happen to me. And so they close themselves off behind a wall because they know that, instinctively, they know that hatred and love are two sides of the same coin. And so forgiving the unforgivable starts with an experience of one's own heart and all the aspects of the heart. To really look at our own shadow, to really know what's there, to really know what is there in the hurt. And so it behooves us to look with clarity and through the heart at what did the perpetrator do to herself? What did he do to himself? Can we cross the floor and meet the camp commandant at Auschwitz, for example, and stroke his cheek and say, go home to your family. You're needed there. Can we really look at the grandchildren and children of such individuals and know that the impact on them is grave? Let's say that you are a descendant of slaves. Let's say you're an African American. Can you look through your heart at the grandchildren or great-grandchildren of the slave owners and the plantation owners and realize the deep impact of shame and guilt that goes along with that? There is an enormous impact for the perpetrator and their descendants. And so, with teachings from an awakened heart, it's an invitation to look at the truth of those of us who say that we're better, that we're trying to forgive, that we need to be more forgiving and inclusive of those bad people, to really look at the truth of what that means. One of my greatest awakenings was realizing that the thing being sought is not lost. It is the seeker that's lost. That was a very big moment for me. And that realizations stayed for a while. And so with each of my experiences of moving deeply into the heart and deeply into that awakened state, then re-identifying with who I think I am within a fairly short period of time, could be days or hours afterwards, and getting another piece of the journey. And so forgiving the unforgivable can only come from meeting our own heart with all of its contents, with honesty, of letting go of the story. Letting go of, I'm the good person, you're the bad person, I'm hard done by, and you need to be punished. When we have the courage to do that, and it really is the courage to choose peace as opposed to the need to be right. And a lot of that comes from our own need to punish the other. And so when we're in our need to punish the other, who are we imitating? The perpetrator. And so that which is unforgivable, it becomes unforgivable within our own heart. And so when we exclude someone from the human race, when we exclude someone as bad, the nature of our soul and the nature of our heart is inclusive. And in reality, it is ourselves that we cannot forgive. That's the truth of the matter. That's the truth of the matter. For when we came into this world, brimming with innocence, as young children, we loved everyone and everything. And then we lost our innocence. And we're yet to forgive ourselves for the great betrayal of self, through being too afraid to stand in our light. And so when we're unable to forgive another, and when we exclude them from the human race, the reality is we're unable to forgive ourselves for what we allowed to happen and for our exclusion after that. The soul can only include, the heart can only include. The heart encompasses everything. It excludes nothing. The awakened heart is the universe. It is God. And everything and everyone belongs.